Hello, I'm Chris Claremont, and I freaking love freaking comics. You got a problem with that?
Yo, my name is Donnie Cates, and I know the brand is I freaking love comics, but I fucking love comics.
Comics, movies, TV, video games, anime, your powers combined. I freaking love comics.
Live with Judah and Returnn.
What up, what up, what up, IFLC, this is Judah Rad, and Robo and I have the privilege of introducing a very, very, very special guest. He's worked on Boondocks, My Wife and Kids, Everybody Hates Chris, Those Who Can't, Marvel's Runaways, American Gods, and Wu-Tang and American Saga, winner of the Peabody Award, American Film Institute Award, Writers Guild of America Award, BET Comedy Award, and the NAACP Image Award. Furthermore, he is the man who introduced the Patriot in Brave New World #2 from Marvel. Also wrote what I would say is the most badass Falcon series. Takes place in the post-Secret Empire landscape. He wrote Lando Double or Nothing, which is a prequel to Solo, and this is Glover Lando, so it's pretty dope, in my opinion. And is currently working on Quincredible for Lions Forge and Killadelphia for Image. Woo! Very, very busy man.
You ever get tired of hearing all that?
No, I actually forget some of it along the way. It's like when you bring things up like Falcon. I haven't heard Falcon in a long time, but yeah, that's good. It's cool.
Awesome. Yeah, most of the time when we're on here, we're talking about Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
So I'd like to lead with a question. I'm just gonna dive right into it. What does Killadelphia mean to you, and why did the world need Killadelphia?
Killadelphia has probably been with me since childhood. I was a big fan of the Hammer films, the Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing Hammer films, Salem's Lot, Kolchak the Night Stalker, anything with vampires or a certain type of tone. Big Richard Matheson fan before I became a Stephen King fan. So it was always in the back of my mind, and as I got older, it would morph and shift as I got better as a writer and as I matured through time. And when I finally broke through in Hollywood, I bugged my managers, because if you look at the first half of my career, you'll see sitcoms. You see Wife and Kids, Boondocks, Everybody Hates Chris. And I always wanted to write genre. And, once you're one thing in Hollywood, you're seen as primarily that thing. So it's very difficult to change the perception unless you do something that just knocks people over. And even my representatives were like, they would always bring me things that were kind of adjacent to what I was already doing. And, everything else sounded like a hobby. And quick sidebar, I was Michael Clark Duncan's stand-in on The Green Mile.
Awesome.
And it's another story all into itself. But, I had a conversation with Stephen King about the work and, getting your stuff out there and believing in your dream and all the idealistic stuff you think of when you break into doing what you want to do. And so I was persistent. I wrote Killadelphia. It wasn't called Killadelphia as a screenplay. I tried to do it as an anime series. I tried to do it as a TV show. I tried to do it in a myriad of ways and just kept getting the door slammed in my face. And once I broke into comics, Falcon and Lando, and I met Jason Shawn Alexander a few years prior to, I started to sort of work with the idea to make it more graphic novel friendly and actually more TV friendly in the way we do TV now, because TV goes through its own evolutionary process of how we do shows, and more serialized shows now instead of standalone shows back when I was coming up. So I just kept at it, and eventually we did the book. And so to answer your question is just more of it's always been there. It's been one of those nagging things. Like, I don't know, just as a writer, sometimes you have an idea that just won't leave you alone. And Jordan Peele was very helpful too. We had a pilot at Comedy Central together before Get Out, and he was so focused in, because he was from the world of comedy as well, and had this whole other vision. This thing, what he's doing now, Us and Get Out and all the other stuff, isn't an accident. All he talked about was what he wanted to do. And he was so persistent that it became sort of infectious, that the ideas that I had, that I'd sort of placed on the side so I could make money, I sort of dusted them off and started to be a little bit more persistent myself.
It's funny that you bring up the different kind of writing and the writing you have to do. Just so you're aware, I watched your interview over at Oklahoma State. A lot of these things that when I hear you talk about writing, you talk about how you're, at first you start writing in the voice of someone else, right? So you're borrowing from that. So when we see Killadelphia, and I know you've been in the game a long time now, but now that we're at Killadelphia, would you say like this is your voice? This is all you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a correlation you can make with my writing of like the first 10 years of my career they were so tinged with fear and insecurity that I just wanted to not lose it because it took so long to get there. I was just holding on to it desperately.
Yeah.
So developing my own voice wasn't something that I was doing. I was just trying to stay in the game.
Oh, yeah. Pay bills, right?
So between 2010 and early 2013, I had like a series of so much bad luck. And I'd had a run of all of those shows that you mentioned in the beginning that were like back to back to back. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'll work forever. This is fantastic. Well, I hit a wall. And personal life, my health, career. And I was in the hospital for a period of time. And I said to myself when I was in the hospital that if I ever get out of here, I'm going to commit myself to doing all of the stuff that made me want to be a writer in the first place. And really what that meant was writing from my heart rather than just writing from my head. When you're making money, when you're just doing the gigs, and everybody's got to do what they have to do in order to be able to survive. But when you're not feeding that other part that inspired you to get here in the first place, there's sort of a hole creatively. And I wanted to fill that hole. So Killadelphia, a few other things, the whole Killadelphia world, because there's a spinoff coming of Killadelphia. And
what'd I say?
And
That's exciting.
other things. So it's like all of these things are sort of, comics in general are like, I don't think anybody does comics to get rich. I think you do them, they're labor of love.
That's right.
And so
especially
for
these
me,
days.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so for me, it was just more of I wanted to express myself in that way and not necessarily wait until I was given the opportunity.
All right.
Wow. Awesome. So you've been this story's been in your head for a very long time. My question is why Philadelphia and why John Adams versus like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or one of the other old guys?
Well, the reason Philadelphia is because Philadelphia is unique in the sense of they're steeped in American history. Liberty Bell, the Constitution, a lot of seminal historical American events took place in Philadelphia and are synonymous with Philadelphia. Plus, unfortunately, like many American cities, they have a lot of social ills, the poverty, crime, racism, homicide rates, a lot of stuff that's hitting Philadelphia is hitting it in a concentrated way. So if you juxtapose the idea of America in its pristine form of what it could be and a lot of the stuff that's happening now, and you put those two together, I think Philadelphia sort of represents the beauty and the difficulty with making a free society work.
That whole mashup of the birth of a nation but also not ignoring the poverty and oppression that exists there at the same time. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
Right.
And I think for John Adams, it was pretty well. For John Adams, I've seen the play Hamilton a lot, and
It's great. I love it.
and like when they laughed at John Adams, the king laughs at John Adams, and I started to do some research on John Adams, and he's sort of like he isn't exalted like Jefferson and Washington and all the people that you named before. He sort of is. He's off to the side. You'll hear his name, but even his son sort of got more love than he did.
That's right.
And it was this thing of, okay, if I could walk through time and I existed today and people were laughing at me and I was there in the beginning and I had a different perception of myself and I had the opportunity to affect like present day matters in a way that, all the other founding fathers are dead at this point, I could really change my image, not only of myself that I have, but also with society at large.
Sure.
And do something because I have perspective on my side, whereas those other guys don't. And so that's why John Adams.
I love that part in the book when he's at Hamilton and he's like, "Oh, they're laughing at me." Like when they're showing his ass. I love that.
Laugh.
So who's our hero here? We got Sangster Senior, Sangster Junior, but then we also have Tevin, who I think has a very interesting arc in that he was seduced by John Adams and has kind of stepped outside of that. Who would you say is the hero of the story at this point?
I think they all see themselves as heroes. There are three entry points to the story. If you look at, there's the Sangster story, there's Adams, and then there's Tevin. And the three of them each see themselves as good guys.
Right.
Like Adams doesn't see himself as a bad guy. Tevin sees himself as kind of the same. He sees himself as a hero as well. So, or the voice of the people / vampires. So there is no real bad guy, except it's up to your. It's a lot like, if I was a police officer, and that code of blue that they have of the brotherhood, they're the good guy to them because they do a righteous thing. They help people. But then there's another culture and community that may look at them as the bad guy based upon some of the interactions that they have with them. And you can play that across the board, not just with black people, but poor people or whatever. Sure. It's really up to perspective how you see good and bad. I don't think it's as simple as a one-dimensional idea that you step into. And that's why I like the Joker movie too. Sort of, and I doubt that we'll see it, but Batman is sort of a bad guy, based upon the perspective of the Joker. So,
sure. Right. At least his dad is. Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, his dad. Yeah.
Right. So we're gonna kind of get into the weeds on the meaning behind this story, because the whole time I was reading it, I was looking for subtext. That was the kind of writing, and that was the kind of story it was. So we're left. There was kind of a cliffhanger at the end of 5, and for everyone watching, this is there's spoilers in this. This is a spoiler episode, so you've been warned. Get the comic. But we were left on kind of a cliffhanger with Seesaw, and I'm trying to figure out what his big picture role is going to be. But apparently, he can make people human. What exactly does he represent in this story right now? And
you have to read 6 in order to be able to get that. But who knows when we'll get. But yeah, well, he can turn vampires human. He can turn you back.
Right. Yeah.
That's a power we haven't seen before in vampire mythology.
Right. Yeah.
That book that he has, that he discovered the ability to do some of the things that he can do. It really speaks to the metaphor when you talk about subtext, that people who have fallen, whether it's in addiction or have lost their way in life or, you name it, that there's always a chance to come back from that you don't have to necessarily, there's hope. There's hope that you can be, but even in that hope, you have to leave the other thing behind because you get something from it. You know, you get, whether it's the good feeling that you get, which is typically what it is, but oftentimes it's a distraction from whatever truth that you're trying to deflect from. And that's why when Brittany's sister,
Yes.
you know, says she wants to be human, I wanna have a child, I wanna have a life, I wanna, if that means I have to die, I wanna feel the sun on my face. I don't wanna be like immortality without purpose sort of is empty. I wanna be, you know, what I was. I think to me that's just spoke to you know, all of us. You know, oftentimes I think we like to paint life as a straight line, like if you just do the right things, everything will work out fine. But I think everybody has challenges in life, and you learn along the way, hopefully. And I can tell you, like every 6 months, it seems like there's something that makes me look at life in a completely different way, and you know, which requires, if not change, this feeling in my head that I should change. And I wanted not necessarily humanity and the vampires, but I wanted them to sort of represent another idea of what it means to be a human being. You know, the thing with Sangster started with my father. I didn't know my father very well growing up, and I'd see him from time to time, and there were two moments where he was a photographer, and this was back during the days when you had to take pictures into a dark room and develop them. And he would develop them, and I'd put them on a clothespin and let them dry. And there was one picture of a dead homeless man with bite marks all over. And I asked him what it was, what they were, and he was like, if the rats get there before, you know, the medical examiner or cops, the rats sort of, you know, have at it. And in my mind, it wasn't rats, it was vampires. I was like 9-10 years old. And so that thing, and my father is deceased, but he, I always wondered if we had more time with the problems that we had in life, would we be able to resolve them? And I think what I'm trying to say with the Sangsters is it's not necessarily a matter of more time. It's the commitment between the two rivaling participants to effectively want peace or love or to foster some sense of harmony in their lives. So that's the Sangster thing. But each story sort of has something under it that is directly connected to me, my life, things that I care about.
And second chances.
And second chances. I mean, you know, I when you read off, like in the beginning, when you were reading off the things that I've done in my career, none of them were like easy and straight lines. And it's like you hear the headline and, you know, but with it, there's a story with each one of them that, you know, some stories were happy stories, some stories were challenges, but I appreciate them all. But it's never easy. And I think there's something beautiful, though, I think, in the difficulty of having a career like this, because I'm always forced to try to be a better version of myself in order to get better at the craft of doing this. It seems like there's a jump, there's an uptick in the decision that I have to make internally that helps me. It was funny because I just had a script that I had to a studio wanted a sample from me, and there was a script that I had done a few years ago, and I decided to clean it up a little bit to submit it as a sample. And you can literally see, like, I can see the mistakes that I didn't see, like now, you know, just in going over that work. And it's funny, even when you said Falcon early on, that was my first comic book, and I made so many mistakes. So there's like a love-hate relationship with that book, because were I to do it today, I would have done it completely differently. It still would have had black art. It still would have had some of the story, the through line would have been the same, but some of the things that I didn't know, like the relationship between words and art, just in general, you know, today's reader versus when I was reading when I was a kid, because I had periods where I had to put books down because of life, you know, to go to college or family, whatever. So it's just, you know, all of this to say that if you are a writer, don't beat yourself up because you're not perfect, coming out of the box, because I don't think anybody is.
All right. I am going to ask you a little bit more later about what you think about your art and struggle and future generations, but we'll do that after we get done with Killadelphia. I want to ask you a quick question. So I got to issue number 3, and there's this 2-page layout of John Adams walking through the ages. And we see the panels, and the second to last panel has Jimi Hendrix and Malcolm X. And then the last panel kind of like made me tilt my head a little bit. I'm just going to read directly what the caption says is, so the elite developed, this is John Adams talking, the elite developed methods of manipulating the system in order to maintain power and control. Masterfully, they perfected the tool that fortified their reign, fear. And Jason Shawn Alexander draws not only our current president, but also President Obama. Would readers, with you being the writer, would readers be mistaken in that there's an equivocation on the elite power between the two? Because they seem pretty different to me.
Well, I think the first thing is I don't necessarily take a position in the book politically. Seemingly I do, but I actually work hard not to. It's not about judgment. I think once you pick a side, you become that book. You know, you become the book that is either a liberal book or a conservative book, and I'm not writing a story anymore. I'm just kind of using my agenda to get, and I'm not doing that at all. This is from the point of view of John Adams, not Rodney Barnes. And I actively work with each one of the characters to say, what would this character feel? Yes, I'm the instrument that's telling the story, but I really, really try to have different points of view, and I try to be empathetic with all of those points of view as to not allow me to bleed into the story, if that makes sense. As far as that panel is concerned, I think it's more of the general idea of power from a macro place, being a president and being someone who has influence, whether you're seen as someone who's a good president or a bad president, or that person rings the bell for you. That doesn't mean that person doesn't have an agenda that they're trying to get across, and that agenda is the thing that at times, if you push a button, you can manipulate the thoughts of that group that you're trying to get to buy into whatever your agenda is. And manipulation isn't necessarily, there's no judgment in the word manipulation. You can manipulate someone to not jump off of a roof, or you can manipulate someone to jump off of a roof. It's according to what you're doing with that. So I think it's a matter of saying you have the yin and the yang of those two faces. And whatever your idea that comes into who those people are, whether you're for them or against them, but they do represent the idea of power and, recent power. And so it was more to juxtapose that there are two ideas here rather than just those two people and what they represent to the mass.
I see.
I know, Judah, you got a quick question for that. If you don't mind me you got the clock on there. The time is 9/11. And clearly 9/11 is, a horrific day. In the panel, in the context of John Adams, and this is John Adams talking, did that mean anything else? Like, did I miss, I saw the clock, I'm like, okay, 9/11, I get it, the towers. Was there something else I was supposed to get with that?
No, not really. I mean, it was more of, that those 2 pages were to do 2 things. One, that whole issue was to do 2 things. A lot of people said, oh my God, John Adams, this is just stupid. I can't believe he put John Adams as the bad guy. And
I loved it.
Yeah, thank you. But I couldn't build a little button in the corner where you could push and for me to say all the things I'm saying to you. He's not the bad guy, blah, 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 blah. So when Jason was doing the research on what John Adams looked like, he was like, this is not a sexy guy. How do we make this guy interesting?
Right.
So I'm like, well, maybe the guy, back in the late 1700s wasn't sexy, but we can kind of sexy him up as he's going through time. And
see him losing weight and stuff.
So
I'm all
Yeah,
jealous.
lose
I'm like,
weight,
dang, what's he doing? Keto?
Yeah, there you go. He is on. There's no carbs in blood.
That's right.
So there's that, and then also to show the perspective thing that I was talking about before. He's experienced all of these things, not like we do. Like, we sort of fit into a generational thing, and then as we get older, we kind of age out, and then a new generation comes in, and whatever they believe and feel becomes like that's the thing that's on the stage at the moment. Then that dies out. Then another generation comes. If you've been around for a few hundred years and you've been able to see the world, you've been able to see the world change, when you're coming up with a plan as to how to implement your ideology, you're not coming from just what you want. You're coming from, this person tried that and it didn't work. This administration tried that. Demagogue tried that. It's like, there's so many different ways now of being able not just to look at American history, but how the world has evolved and shifted. Because if you think about it, back when he was president, you didn't really communicate with other continents in the same way. Like, communication has gotten to a place where if something happens in London or
It's
China
immediate.
or Australia, immediate, you got it. Like, it'll come up on my phone 4 seconds after it happens. There, you had to wait till a ship came or, whatever mode you got there. And there's something about the immediacy and the speed that life kind of moves at that I can imagine if you were around from that period of time to this period of time would have an effect on you, that you wouldn't be rattled as much by the idea of change because you've seen so much of it. And that would become a natural byproduct of who you are as a leader.
Makes sense. I got to say thanks because you've finally given me a reason to be sexy John Adams at the next Comic-Con.
You go. All you need is a black jacket and a red shirt, and there you go.
There it is.
Boom. Sexy. Yeah.
So speaking of John Adams, does he represent the white savior trope, would you say?
It's the second time someone asked me this week. And not so much, I think, the white savior trope. He was more progressive, from what I've read, than any of the other guys around him. Like, he didn't own slaves. He was open to the idea of women's rights. As that period of time goes, as to what was deemed proper, he probably would fit more into what you would look at as the right way to think. That said, it's still antiquated by today's standards. It wasn't so much the white savior trope as much as it is, up until President Obama, all of the presidents have been white guys. When you go to school, in America, you sort of learn that, anything that's been created or of note typically was created by a white guy. Even if you go like to the Greeks or, Galileo, whatever, whoever, typically we don't come into the story until later on. And I wanted to be able to not necessarily challenge that idea, but there's a thinking that goes with that I think plays into the subconscious of how we do the math of how race works in America, which is oftentimes people of color are afterthoughts. And I didn't want that to be. I wanted to put the Sangsters and Tevin and John Adams on the same level of thinking. It's like I wanted their stories. This is the reason why John Adams' story is the third book. Because if I had made it the first book, it would have been a John Adams story. It wouldn't have been, you wouldn't have paid attention to any of the other stories. I wanted to just kind of tease him a little bit in the first. You get to see what he looks like in the second. And then in the third, it's like, okay, this is why this all makes sense. I wanted to put all of it on the equal playing field. So it's not so much is he the trope, but he does represent an idea of what power and influence and privileged thinking. I think one of his disconnects, not to give away what happens, but one of his disconnects is he looks at the world from on high. The perspective he's had from so long is like from up here, so that even though he's trying to help the common person who's falling through the cracks, he doesn't
can't
see
relate.
the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Can't relate. And it's that disconnect with not being able to relate that actually is sort of an Achilles heel. Because you're only looking at the situation with idealism. You're not necessarily looking at it with the practical reality of what people have to go through in a difficult capitalist nation. When you're at the bottom of that totem pole, how difficult it is for people. So,
right. So I'm gonna ask you this question, and I'm gonna say, I just want to preface it with, I promise I'm listening and I'm not ignoring you. So it sounds like I'm gonna ask this question. I'm like, did you not just hear what I just said? But here's why I'm asking it is, again, I watched the interview with at Oklahoma State, and you talk about the writer's voice. You talk about how how a lot of times you were hired to be the voice of, hey, the black guy, like, you're black, do black stuff, make this character do black stuff, and you kind of address that. But you also address, the anger of people of color, specifically black community in art, in literature. So when I'm reading Killadelphia, even though, like, as you're talking, I'm kind of like readjusting my thought process, and I'm like, wait a minute, is this the voice of Rodney Barnes, or is this the narrator of the character he's created? Is this the narration of the character he's created, which is more often than not one and the same, clearly. But when I'm reading through these 5 issues I was able to read, and I'm watching, you can't help but notice the symbolism. The 2 starving vampires in chains shackled at their neck, and John Adams giving them a air quotes choice to either join us and eat the 2 guys, or be fed on, which isn't a choice at all, right? And so, as I look at vampirism in general, I guess, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I would like your input on this. It seems to be symbolic of the innate anger of people of color, in this particular story, the black community of Philadelphia, and not only is that anger represented by vampirism, but it's John Adams causes it, even though he thinks he's the good guy. So is that accurate? Am I missing something? It seems kind of overt.
No, that's good. I would only add that it's not just people of color. I think it's poor white people as well.
Sure. Okay.
I think it's people
the oppressed.
The oppressed. I think
Yes.
anybody that would fall into that category of having to do things that they don't necessarily want to do in order to be able to survive. Even right now, TV's on the screen. That's what I'm pointing at. With the coronavirus and people reopening states, there are a lot of people who have to go back to work right now, or going back to work in dangerous situations that don't want to necessarily have to, but if they don't, they won't survive. Potentially, they have to feed their families. They got to pay their bills. That $1,200, won't keep them going for very long. And what do they do? What do you do when you're faced with that, decision? And I think, even though that was more the extreme of in the change, it is symbolic of living in a world where seemingly you're supposed to be free and that you have choices, but oftentimes those choices are dictated by decisions that really play a role in survival, not just for you, but your family and the people that you care about. So it's sort of it's freedom with an asterisk, and yes, John Adams is at the head of it, and he's the one that's pulling the strings. The only thing I would say in this idea of John Adams is he's more of a dictator than it is a democracy where there's a Senate and a Congress that you have to go to play nice with. He's sort of making, he's sort of forcing the issue. So it's not exactly what democracy is, but a lot of the themes that you just expressed are themes that run through it. But again, my opinions in it don't play as big of a role as seemingly the book may lead on.
Okay.
So just to gush a little bit, the Britney scene in the car with the creepy pedophile cop guy, it's my favorite part, man. I love that part.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You think she's the prey, but she's actually the predator. I love it.
The TV version of that will be so cool if it ever gets to be shot. But
yes.
yes.
and I do have questions about the TV version as well. I'm going to get to those in a moment. So I know we're kind of beating John Adams to death here, but what does his desired end state look like? Because in a United States that's completely overrun with vampires, where everyone's a vampire, what do they eat? You know?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's an idea that there's a control that you could put in a lot in the same way that we do. You know, we're carnivores primarily. You know, we do have this plant-based movement that's happening, but McDonald's is still making, you know. So I think he's looking at it that there's a system, that there's a way that if everybody's on board, that we'll be able to figure out how to make it work to suppress. I think the roles would be reversed, that you would be able to suppress humanity in the name of a vampire-controlled state.
Okay.
You know, and humans would be cattle, but humans would also be negotiated with. I mean, I think it's a lot like the original Planet of the Apes, the Charlton Heston one, where you had humans and you had apes, but the humans were sort of there just to be that. The apes didn't suck their blood, of course, but they were diminished. They didn't really have any power.
You maniacs!
I don't want you to ruin anything, but are we going to see more of Brittany? Is Brittany's story's not done? Okay, good. I really like her character.
I will let her know. Brittany is my daughter. She is outside right now in the backyard, but Jason did a great job. She looks exactly like my Brittany. And,
that's awesome.
And so Brittany and Brianna are both, they're my daughters. And
Nice.
Brianna was in Falcon, and I couldn't get her to read the book, so I had her killed.
Oh, man.
That'll learn her.
If you pay attention to book 5, Brittany pulls the head off of one of the cops.
Yep.
That's me.
Awesome.
And that was Jason, because Jason kills me randomly. If you look really closely, you'll see me die a couple of times. Jason enjoys killing me. But he had Brittany kill me. And he does this photorealistic, that's how Jason draws, like he takes a picture of the image first and he kind of sketches the image. And so my daughter, Brittany, enjoyed pulling my head off and biting me and a lot of other mean things. But just Brittany as a character, I think, oftentimes when you see vampires in literature, they're old. You know, you don't get a younger voice. And if you do get a younger voice, they're not really thinking about life or any of that kind of stuff. I think you had Claudia in the Anne Rice books, and there are a few others.
The Interview with the Vampire, yeah.
Yeah, Interview with the Vampire. But you don't have a lot of, where they interact with people. And it's kind of cool because if you're a couple hundred years old, but you still look like a child, there's something scary just within that, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like I look at it like on the bottom of the ocean where you have those fish that look like rocks and someone swims by, grabs it and snatches it.
Yeah.
That's what I look at the kid vampire
that's
being.
That's right.
As, like
That
you
is
said,
scary.
Yeah, it's like you see them as these innocents that, but ultimately they're as deadly as anything else because you lower your guard when you're in their presence.
I think that's when I like Brittany the most is from that scene in the alleyway. You introduce her as innocent, and she kind of keeps her innocence in that scene because it's not her who kills the dude; it's her friend. So like, okay, and really, and probably by design, I imagine you're like, yeah, we're gonna let you keep thinking that she's just this little girl vampire until the cops and then pull the head off, and it's like, she's not a little girl.
And that was the thing, too, of I didn't want it to be, oftentimes when you see vampire stories or vampire movies or whatever, they're always enraged. Like, they don't really have an on-off button. It's like they get around blood, they lose their minds, there's no real perspective, or they're really, really sexy all the time.
That's right.
And I wanted, like, Brittany's rage was really triggered by hurt and disappointment as much as it was a lust for blood. And again, those things in life when I can look to a lot of the moments in my life that I regret, decisions I've made when I was less than my best self. And typically I was angry, I was frustrated or I was petulant about something. And that, sort of preceded whatever behavior, yelling, arguing, saying things, whatever, things I wish I could take back. And I wanted that to be as much an aspect of these vampires' humanity as well, that it was about regret, and hurt. They still have emotions. They're still connected to humanity in some way.
Sure.
Brittany has such conflict right now because it's almost like she's stuck between her loyalties to Vampire Nation and her sister. So I'm very excited to see how that plays out.
And I also wanted to play with that period of the Civil War. I'm intrigued by history. I think Civil War and Reconstruction are periods that, just as a history buff, I sort of dig a lot. And being able to, hopefully in Arc 2, go back in time to tell some stories within both Adams' story and Abigail's story, and also in Brianna and Brittany's stories. But, Adams has his own Republican Guard, for lack of a better term, and they all come from different periods of history too, in World War II, World War I, and to be able to tell their stories and how Adams connected with them as well. But really, it's a story of America, just told through different periods, and it just so happens that all of those periods converge on today.
Shawn Alexander's amazing. You really did a good job picking out your artists for this.
I hate giving him. Any compliments or whatever. It's like every week I feel like I'm saying, "Oh, Jason's a genius. Jason is so wonderful." He is. All joking aside, Jason. I don't think Jason knows how great Jason is. And if you ever get into his studio and you see all of his fine art as well, he's an incredible artist. And the biggest thing, there are a lot of guys and women that can draw pretty pictures, but Jason is like a director. He has the ability to convey the emotion that's underneath the scene, and that's a different skill. That's a skill that I think only the great ones have, to where it's not just about I remember those Daredevil books that Frank Miller did back in the day when Elektra was dying, and it was a similar thing to where you believed that Elektra, like these two people were in love, they're superheroes, or Dark Phoenix, during a Claremont Aaron's run, or Perez with the Titans or whatever. It's like the great ones, and I put Jason amongst that group, just have the ability to get under a scene and under the subtext of what's happening in the moment and really pull out the emotion. And that was a big thing for me too, in being able to make it a sophisticated story, not just one that was, okay, it's vampires and most of them are black and they're in the city. It's like to convey a lot of the headier themes that we're talking about right now, you really need an artist that can capture all of that stuff and make it feel real. Because there is a version of this book that probably wouldn't go over as well as this version has. And it really is the version that doesn't have Shawn. I mean, Jason, he is, he's really, really good.
That splash page, there's this one splash page that I want to get blown up and put on my wall.
Heaven and Hell.
There it
Heaven
is.
and Hell, yes. You got it.
That's my favorite one, too. That's my favorite. I actually, he called me one night. He only lives a mile away from me, or we live a mile away from each other. And I told him that oftentimes when it comes to splash pages, I'm really just trying to see what it would look like for his art to do a thing. I'm just trying to, because I'm a fanboy too.
Yeah.
And Dante's Inferno, it was an image when I was at the Sistine Chapel. You're not supposed to take pictures of the ceiling, but I did.
We won't tell.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think they're going to come and get me. Not doing a pandemic.
They're big fans of our show. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, but there you go. There's a couple of paintings that kind of rival Dante's Inferno. I don't know if that was the exact story that they were telling.
Robert Blake type stuff?
No, it was just more of
Or William Blake, excuse me.
no, it sort of. I mean, it was sort of like the devil torturing people. You know, that stuff in hell, when the classic shots of people, what torment was like, what the torment in hell was like. And, you know, the thing that I'd like to do, you know, again in subsequent arcs is to, almost like what Gaiman does with Sandman, where you play with, you know, reality and history and fantasy and mythology, blend all of those things. I won't go as far as, you know, he goes, because it's not that kind of world. But anytime, you know, I think of Alan Moore's Down Amongst the Dead Men, I think it was called, when he went to hell to get Abby's soul back. And you're mixing, you know, you got Phantom Stranger there, Dead Man, but you're still dealing with one of the realms of hell and all the things you have to go through to get into hell and all of that stuff, and the imagery that Bassett and Totalbin did that was beautiful. I'm trying to bring that type of feeling to this book, to where, yeah, you're dealing with vampires, yes, you're dealing with the city and an urban environment and all of that, but under it, there's still like a form of heaven and hell that's internal and psychological. And there's a degree of mythology that I think as people we carry through life. And to sort of give a voice and imagery to that, you know, I wanted Jason to be able to play in that realm and see what it would look like. It's all experimental, but yeah.
So I got two quick, easy questions for you. Maybe not so easy. But then I got two harder questions, maybe. So, given your career, I know you have, you know, like you said earlier, someone asked for a sample of a writing of yours, so you brushed this off and you got stuff ready. Do you plan on, or do you have anything ready in the chamber if one of the big two, Marvel or DC, came to you and said, you know, do you have something? Do you have a character you would like to write for?
I would love to do Swamp Thing. I mean, Jason and I always talk about doing a Black Label book because I really like awesome. The Question and those and what they do. I think those books are fantastic. I'd like to do a Nightwing. I have a Nightwing story that I'd love to do that has horror themes in it for Gotham City.
That's dope.
Darker stuff, man. There's any of the darker stuff. The superhero thing is like the people who were critical of Falcon were like, that's not who he is. He doesn't belong in hell and, you know, demons and all of that stuff. And it's like, but that's what I like.
That's
and
right.
Trying to tell a Justice League story or trying to tell a story that's sort of, you know, your standard comic book fare.
Not your deal.
I could do it, but when you say what gets you excited and what you really want to do,
Evil.
You have not so much just evil, but I think I don't think life is as clear cut as just good and evil. And so dimensions on what that is. It's like I remember I had a philosophy professor once who said, you know, if you think about Satan really just had a different way of looking at life than God. Mm-hmm. And yes, you could say that's evil in the sense of, you know, God being, you know, the entity responsible for life and overseeing us and loving us. But it was almost the questioning of how God does what God does that made Satan Satan and got him cast out. Yes, there's that whole thing of hating his creation, meaning us and all the other stuff that goes with it. But it's a matter of perspective. And I think there's something about that perspective that's interesting to me about good and bad.
Now I can expect angry text from my mom. Thanks, appreciate that. No, I'm just kidding.
Sorry, Mom. No, I'm not a Satanist, Mom.
No.
I'm not an atheist. Not at all. It's more of a philosophical.
No, I understand.
My parents are Jews. They don't care.
So here's one for you, and this is more of a request, and this might be a short answer. Would you be willing to give us a you heard it here first moment on the expanded universe, like just a quick peek into to what you might have planned in the future.
Yeah, there's a character that's coming that is related to one of the main characters of Killadelphia that kind of has her own world of a sort of paranormal investigation in another city. And she's dealing with more than vampires, but it's more of a trying to figure out how to say it. This is the hard question. She has her own world that she's dealing with that has ghosts and demonic possession and a bunch of other bad stuff that she's helping people fix. But then she gets called to a city, I won't say which city, to deal with someone, to help someone fix a problem that we've been trying to fix for 6 issues so far.
Okay.
So,
Oh, wow. That is so exciting. So there's other monsters out there, not just vampires.
there's other monsters, and they will probably manifest themselves in the same sort of realistic way that we try to do Killadelphia. It's like, our vampires aren't really tongue-in-cheek, and I try to really work on, if there's a vampire there, they have a story that's bigger than the thing that they're actually just doing. Mm-hmm. There's another reason they're there. Whether it's Brittany doing a thing in the car to lure them there, but she's got a bigger story, and that, she came from the Civil War and she worked for Abigail, and, and there's something under that. And so there's always a little bit more, and I try to give you just enough of these different vampires that aren't Sangster Senior or Adams or any of the main players that make the world bigger than just the story that we're seeing progress.
All right. I got one more, and then I'm going to stop Bogart. I'm sure Judah wants to talk too, but just one last one. So, in preparation for this, I rewatched Return of the King from episode 9, season 1 of the Boondocks.
Yep.
Now, I was born in 1980. I'll be 40 this year. So when the Boondocks came out, I'm in my mid-20s. So like most mid-20s people, I'm watching the Boondocks. So, but rewatching it now, I'm not gonna lie, it hit a little bit different, and didn't like it less. But I'm looking at it through a different lens. So, me personally, and I talk to especially with social media and Twitter, stuff like that. I struggle with the balance of having honest discussions when it comes to critiquing subcultures, even within my own people. Right. So if me and my dad want to have a critical discussion of Puerto Ricans on the island or Puerto Ricans in the Bronx, I may not want to have that kind of discussion because I don't think it can happen honestly with white people, for example. Like, here's what I hate about Puerto Ricans in the Bronx. Like, I'm not going to have that discussion. So did you or the other creators of that episode ever get any pushback? And man, that's not the only episode the Boondocks did this in. With regard to critiquing subcultures within the black community in a way that and I know firsthand that it has, is going to be, the point is going to be perverted by racists to like be some sort of validating, like, see, that's exactly that's why I say the N-word. Look at what he's saying. That's what I'm talking about. The difference between N-words and black people. Like, was there any pushback? Do you regret any of that?
Well, I think the two things that you point out, the first one, that the period of time that the Boondocks hit the TV screens was a unique time. It was before social media. So, you were kind of operating in a vacuum of just telling the story that you wanted to tell. I don't think, this is just me, I think that you make what you make and people take from it what they will. If you're so focused on, if you want to have that conversation, like you were saying with the Puerto Rican one, of extremes, if I were you, if I'm focused on what people are going to take from that conversation or how they're going to perceive that conversation, I'm not necessarily telling stories anymore. I'm kind of reworking my story to fit what I think someone else is going to think about it. And I'm not necessarily telling my truth. And I think the best of television, the best of storytelling, is when you tell your truth. And if some people don't get it, they just don't get it. I think when you start to maneuver things towards, now that said, it was funny, the script that we're talking about, so not to be a hypocrite. The script that I'm talking about was probably it was the hardest script about a really hard world that I'd ever written. And it was brutal. And it was brutal to a particular group. And I wrote it, I think I wrote it way back when, almost 2010, I think is when I wrote that script. And I did another revision in 2014 and then today. And going through that script, and I was taking out some of the harsh and the mean and some of the things that were honest. They were true to the world of the story that I was telling. But I took them out not because of what people would, like what you were saying, like on a macro level that they're going to feel a particular way about a culture or, that type of thing. I took it out because it was just the sensibilities of today's world versus when I first wrote it are completely different. What's seen as being hard or mean or cruel or whatever. It's funny, coming up in writers' rooms, those comedy rooms, when I first started, we were brutal to each other. The jokes we would make about each other, the things that we would say, and I was in it with everybody else, if you can imagine. But you're behind closed doors and you think that it's like being at the cafeteria table when you're in high school, just kind of cracking on each other. And I look at how writers' rooms have evolved from that period to today. They don't exist that way anymore. Now people's feelings are taken into consideration. That could be teen bullying, and this could be seen in a particularly different way. That said,
and that's not always a bad thing, right? Would you say?
Which one?
And that's not always a bad thing, taking people into consideration. Like it's just
it's always a good thing. It's always a good thing. I think the thing is, the culture that you originally. I'll put it to. I grew up in a small town in Maryland, and in the time that I grew up, I adopted the thinking of a lot of people who raised me. Whatever they thought, I thought, because that was the rule.
Of course.
When I came to LA, it was like culture shock. I had to interact in a lot of different arenas with people who thought completely differently than I did. And after a while, I started to see the virtues in letting go some of the stuff that I thought was just the way that it should be.
Sure.
A lot of people don't necessarily want to let those things go. But if you don't evolve, you kind of stay in the same place. But to your original point, because I could go on forever with this one. To your original point,
we got all day.
I think that, yeah, I wish. To your original point, I think that if you're writing with a concern of what someone's going to think, unless it's something that can hurt someone else, I would say be true to your art more so than anything else.
Okay.
If that makes sense. It's like that's the thing. Anything that's disparaging to someone, hurtful, whatever, I'm not speaking in terms of that. I'm speaking in terms of your experience and what you've had as a human being on this earth and the story that you want to tell. I would be true to that.
Awesome.
So around the time when you were co-producing the Boondocks, you were working with Reginald Hudlin, who wrote one of the best, definitely one of the two best Black Panther runs ever. And that's before you got into comics. Was he an influence or an inspiration? Did he kind of guide you along when you were thinking about getting into comics?
No, I mean, I already came to the table. By the time I've been reading comics since I was 3 or 4 years old, so it was always in my head of wanting to do this. In fact, it was reverse engineered. I tried to write comics when I was younger. I'm glad I didn't get a shot. It was bad enough when I finally did get a shot. But guys like Reggie, what they represented to me was that it was possible, that you could actually do it. Not just Reggie, but the Milestone guys, Dwayne McDuffie, Dennis Cowan.
Oh, yeah.
All of those guys, there weren't a lot of black guys writing and drawing comic books when I was coming up, or at least I didn't know, because you only see a name and you didn't see an image that went with the name oftentimes. But the fact that they were able to do it and to do it well was basically what I needed to know that it was possible, that someone had already done it. And it's almost like one of those things when nobody can run a 4-minute mile. Then somebody runs a 4-minute mile. Now everybody starts running a 4-minute mile because it's possible. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the importance of having guys like Reggie or any of the other guys who, came before me in doing this. So,
do you have any cool stories to tell us? Anything coming up as a writer, doing all this awesome stuff? You have this amazing career. Do you have any insider baseball kind of stuff? Any cool behind the curtain stories?
I mean, the whole thing for me was most of those I can't tell. But I'll say the biggest thing for me was, for instance, the story with the Green Mile. I was a production assistant on a movie, Stigmata, with Gabriel Byrne, little horror movie back in the day. And I found out that they were filming the Green Mile on the Warner Brothers lot, on the stages not too far away. And they were doing a casting call for big black guys. I'm a big black guy. So, and I also found out that the transportation captain that was on Stigmata was going to go on the Green Mile. So this was my opportunity. And there's a through line with me doing extreme things to put myself in a position to be able to get in, to find an in. And so I begged this guy, you got to get me around the people who hire. I didn't even know who, what, where, but I'm a big fan of Stephen King. That's really all I wanted. So he had a 1939 paddy wagon. And he said, look, I'll put you in this paddy wagon. We'll go to Frank Darabont's house. And when he sees the paddy wagon, you can jump out and he'll see like a big black guy juxtaposed to this paddy wagon. And you can make your pitch for wanting to be a part of the movie. So I get in the paddy wagon. And 1939 paddy wagons don't have air conditioning or shock absorbers. So by the time we get to Frank's house, I look like an inmate. And it was him, it was David Valdez, who was the executive producer and the line producer, I believe. And I jump out of the back of and if they'd had a gun, each one of them would have shot me. Because I was scary looking. But Frank, who used to be a production assistant, was so gracious, and he appreciated. I was like, Mr. Darabont, I love Shawshank Redemption, I love Stephen King. I really would like an opportunity just to be a part of anything. I'll be a PA, I'll do whatever. And they made me, before they cast the role of John Coffey, they made me a stand-in. And so I was there to be able to see all of the auditions for all of the guys that came in. And Tom Hanks was there. And so from that place, after they hired Michael, and I had to walk him from the parking lot to the stage, and he was as green but as gracious as could be. And eventually they hired me, and I was there most every day watching the filming of, met Stephen King. He signed all my books. He was as gracious to me. There's a big picture of me and Stephen King over my fireplace. I got a bunch of those types of stories that it's like, it was always, I wasn't going to be denied. I was going to figure out a way to make it work. So there you go.
You know what? I'm going to do the same thing, but I'll probably mess it up. I'm just going to go find someone famous, hide in their trunk, jump out, get
No,
punched in the face.
no,
like,
no.
Hey, put me in your movie. Put me.
No, it was like you said earlier about the working in writers' rooms, and I was talking about whatever. It's a different world now.
Nah,
I don't know if the same thing that worked back then worked now. It's like
Get this guy out of here.
security's different. Exactly. Well, 9/11. I can say this: 9/11 changed a lot
Ooh,
because on
tell
Wife
me.
and Kids we used to shoot with an audience.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went from an audience to a metal detector to why do we need an audience to big security lockdowns. And,
Yeah.
it's only got more and more difficult to,
And now this virus,
Get on.
that's going to add another layer of change to society. It's probably going to not ever go away.
big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Rodney Barnes, thank you so much. I'd be lying if I said we weren't extremely nervous coming into this. You are extremely accomplished, and we're honored to have you on here. For the watchers at home, check out Killadelphia. It only came out this past fall. You're only 5 issues in. 6 should be dropping sometime in May, whenever we can get
May
comics
6th.
out. So you have, if they're
Hope
gonna
so.
ship, hope.
we'll see.
Head to your
If
local
not-
comic book store.
If not, you could come to my house and I'll read it to you personally.
Yes.
Okay. The next
Right.
edition of
see it.
IFLC will be Rodney Barnes reads, and he's gonna read it now.
There you go.
It would be cool to link up with you again in like 6 issues from now and do
Happy.
this again. This is really fun, and it was really, this is great.
Likewise. We'll talk about the TV version next.
Oh,
Awesome. Yes.
it.
Oh, ooh.
I forgot. No.
We started the closing, but can we real quick? What can you tell us about the TV? What can you tell us about the TV version?
We heard the news
right.
broke that you got something going.
Yeah, we optioned the show with a company by the name of Levantine that makes a lot of good movies, and this is, I believe, their first foray into television. And I'm writing the script for the Killadelphia pilot now,
Yes.
and the show Bible for the series, and we hope next year leads to some good stuff.
Man, I'm hoping like an HBO that's not willing to pull back any punches type,
Right, with lots of
Think the-
blood.
We think alike.
Awesome.
Rodney Barnes, you have a great one, and until next time.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. You take it easy.
You too.
Take it easy.
All right.
Well, there it is, Judah, the great and legendary Rodney Barnes. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys go out and pick up Killadelphia. One thing I
should.
definitely want to say is hit up your local comic book store. Reach out to them. The 5 issues that we got, Luke from, quick shout out, Dragon Lair in Mililani, Hawaii. We called him up. We let him know that we wanted all 5 issues, and he was able to. We stayed 6 feet away. Don't worry.
He was
Don't
like a
forget
drug.
to.
He's like a drug deal in the
He's our
parking
dealer.
lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was late at night and it was in the dark alley. Thanks, Luke. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell so that when we put up cool shit like this, you guys get notifications. If you want to pitch in and help us out with the funds to get better equipment, we would appreciate it over at www.patreon.com/I freaking love comics. Even if you don't, really word of mouth and the share button is almost just as good. And don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Discord,
Tinder.
all the stuff. Tinder, whatever. See ya.
All right. Later.
Comics, movies, TV, video games, anime, your powers combined. I freaking love comics.
Live with Judah and Robo.